The Big Ten better buckle up, let me tell you, because today a massive move was made where Jim Knowles, the best defensive coordinator in the country in my mind, his move from Ohio State to Penn State might be the biggest move that the Big Ten Conference has seen in the 21st century. And I pause and am very careful with my words because that's a very big statement. Incredibly big statement right there. The biggest coaching move of the 21st century. I don't even know if that's entirely accurate, but it's certainly in the ballpark. And if Penn State wins a national championship with Jim Knowles as their defensive coordinator, and or Ohio State has a little bit of a step back, I think the hiring that James Franklin and Pat Kraft just pulled off, taking Jim Knowles away from a school that they have not beaten since 2016, is a pretty big deal. Never in my life would I have believed that a celebrated NFL caliber, just in his own league defensive coordinator like Jim Knowles would leave Ohio State after winning the national championship to coach for Penn State, who Ryan Day is 6-0 against. 6 straight up wins, no losses, and if we're being very honest about it, Ohio State was in control in all of those games. Think about that. Think about it and meditate on it. Jim Knowles, who shut down elite offenses all season and all of last season, the mastermind behind Ohio State's elite defense, is now wearing blue and white. He's jumped ship to Penn State, and with how college football works now, when the spring portal window opens up, maybe he takes some Ohio State players. It's not unheard of. I mean, I don't think anyone expected this to happen, for Penn State to pay $3.1 million to Jim Knowles over 3 years, and he comes to Penn State. If anyone would have said that a week ago, I think everyone would have laughed, or at least 99% of people, and I would have been in the 99%. This is the same man who fixed Ohio State's defense in 2 years, brought it from a Kerry Combs, Matt Barnes ruined unit that had talent but was very unfundamentally sound, if that's even a word that can be used. And within 2 years, they were fielding an elite unit. They held Notre Dame to 14, Penn State to 12, Michigan to 30, and Missouri to 14 in 2023. And they held Penn State to 6 this year, not counting that pick 6, Indiana to 15, Tennessee to 17, Oregon to 21, Texas to 14, and Notre Dame to 23. And now he's tasked with elevating an elite Nittany Lions defense. Elite in talent, elite in assistant coaching. Tom Allen was a little bit questionable as a defensive coordinator. His move to Clemson upgraded Clemson's defensive staff and their potential. And I said that I thought that move was a win-win for both Clemson and Penn State because I believed Penn State would upgrade their defensive coordinator. They have. They now have the nation's best defensive coordinator. So I want to talk about what this means for the balance of power in the Big Ten, because this could certainly shake some things up, how his game plan evolves with this new team, any potential broad changes I'm going to be learning about, how he will operate with Penn State, as you all will, because I didn't expect this move to happen. And of course, will this make Penn State the team to beat in 2025? Because Penn State's returning the vast majority of their starters. They're bringing back a lot on the offensive side of the ball and losing a lot more on defense. But now I'd say they have the best defensive coordinator and probably the best defensive staff in all of college football. So let's break it down. And just very quickly, I want to give you all a reminder to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell if you haven't already, and comment your thoughts down below. Join our Discord server via the link in the description or pinned comment. If you want to support the channel, there's links to my Patreon page and merchandise store in the pinned comment and also the description. And I highly advise you to hit the notification bell so that way you can get notified when we go live Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern time. I know that this video is not being recorded on a Monday or Wednesday, but that's because there's things I want to talk about. I have the additional time, and Jim Knowles being hired away is definitely breaking news. That is a nuclear explosion in Hiroshima or Nagasaki moment for college football. It's groundbreaking. So I want to talk about that right now and really dive in. And first and foremost, we'll get to that in a few minutes. I'm just very excited, so that's why I nearly jumped ahead there. Just some facts and information about Jim Knowles that I want to discuss briefly. He spent 3 years with the Ohio State Buckeyes, and he's fielded 2 top 3 defenses in those 3 seasons. 2022 is a little bit of a transition period. For much of the year, it looked like they were going to have a top 10, maybe even top 5 unit at times, but the Penn State game showed some cracks. The Michigan game blew that defense wide open, and Georgia did the same thing in the Peach Bowl. But in 2023, the defense was top 3. I personally would argue it is top 2, but statistics don't say it was definitively top 2. It was in that number 3, number 2 range behind Michigan that year. And in 2024, in my opinion, he fielded another top 2 unit. Analytics say number 1. I think Texas's defense, when both teams faced off, was the more impressive unit. But that's just a 1-game sample size. I think Ohio State overall for the whole year was the most impressive defense, certainly the most well-coached defense, most fundamentally sound unit, perfect at tackling. The pass rush evolved as the season went on. And speaking of pass rush, his Oklahoma State defense in 2021 was second in the nation, I believe, in sacks per game. He's reportedly receiving $3.1 million over 3 years to be the Nittany Lions defensive coordinator, and he will be coordinating a defense that returns 14 two-deep players, including stars like Tony Roas at linebacker, or A.J. Harris at corner, Denai Dennis Sutton at D-end, Zane Durant at defensive tackle, and there are other players in that two-deep, or maybe even some third-stringers, some younger freshmen who, given Knowles' history of elite talent evaluation, could have breakout seasons this coming year. So this is a very, very impactful hire. But I have seen people talk about Jim Knowles, like maybe the talent at Ohio State carried him a bit. And it certainly helps when you have Larry Johnson and Tim Walton recruiting for you, when you have James Laurinaitis, who's been an awesome linebackers coach, I think one of the best in the business at the linebackers coach with Ohio State. But I don't think this bears out. And I want to go back to 2021 for a few minutes here and briefly discuss Jim Knowles' 2021 defense, and we'll discuss all his defenses since then. In his 4th year with Oklahoma State, he commanded a defense that only allowed 18.2 points per game, which was 10th, 0.271 opponent points per play, 10th, 290.2 opponent yards per game, 4th, 4.3 yards per play, 4th, also 4th in opponent yards per carry, only allowing 2.6, 19th in opponent yards per pass attempt, allowing 6.5, 25th in opponent yards per completion, allowing 11.2. And they had a 10.87 sack percentage on defense, which was 3rd. And they earned 8.36 tackles for loss per game, which was 1st. They were an aggressive unit. They were a unit that shut down in large part Lincoln Riley's offense with Caleb Williams kind of at their peak in 2021. And they did a very impressive job all throughout 2021. Obviously, in the bowl game, they faced off against Notre Dame and allowed 35 points, but Knowles was not the defensive coordinator in the bowl game. Another fact that ties with Penn State is Jim Knowles, before he faced off against Penn State this year, was the only defensive coordinator in the country to not allow a single touchdown to an Andy Kotelnicki offense. They only allowed, I believe, 6 points to Kansas in 2021, and then the defense only allowed 6 points to Penn State, where Kotelnicki was the OC, in 2024. So the only defensive coordinator who historically can stop Andy Kotelnicki is now on the same staff as Andy Kotelnicki. It gets even better, though. 2022's defense for Ohio State was a paper tiger. It was not nearly the same paper tiger it was in 2020 or 2021, but it still was. In his first year with Ohio State, Knowles' defense allowed 21 points per game at the end of the year, 17th. They allowed 42 to Georgia, 45 to Michigan, seemingly a billion rushing yards to both of them, and Stetson Bennett averaged like 11 yards per pass attempt. You see that in the fact that Ohio State was 82nd in opponent yards per completion, allowing 12.3, 67th in opponent yards per pass attempt, allowing 7.2. They were pretty good, though, for much of the year at stopping the run, allowing 3.5 yards per carry. And mind you, in the Michigan game, they basically shut down Michigan's rushing offense for 2.5 quarters. But the big plays forced Knowles to adjust, and that opened up the ground game a little bit. Also, Michigan that year was a second-half team. Ohio State only allowed 5 yards per play, 29th. 321.5 opponent yards per game, 12th. And 0.325 opponent yards per play, which was 29th. Their sack percentage was 8.63%. It was 15th. Part of that was because the defense was very aggressive. He adjusted, Knowles did, and became a much more conservative play caller in 2023. And Ohio State earned about 6.62 tackles for loss per game that year. The defense started off very hot, and the signs that they were going to be an elite unit in 2023 were there. It's part of the reason why I predicted them to be an elite unit in 2023 and was proven correct. But they were a little bit of a ways away. Then 2023 comes around, and it's the second year with a very complex system, and not only that, but Ohio State defensively was kind of broken by the time that 2022 came around. They needed a little bit of a rebuild. They couldn't just reload. Well, in 2023, they reloaded the shotgun, and they were just burying people with lead all season long. They only allowed 11.6 points per game, second. 0.175 opponent points per play, also second. 268.3 opponent yards per game, which is third. And you will see that a lot of these numbers were actually superior to the numbers that Ohio State had in 2024. Knowles hasn't just fielded an elite defense full of super seniors and some graduates and Caleb Downs. Last year's defense was generationally good too. You can purchase ESPN Plus or maybe find, some illicit way around the paywall and look at Bill Connolly's review of the 2023 season, and it wasn't only Michigan's defense or Penn State's or Iowa's that was described as generational last year. Ohio State's was too. And Ohio State's defense last year did not have the shine that Michigan's or Penn State's did. They had a lot better pass rushers and I would say more alien players. But what I can tell you is they were more fundamentally sound than Penn State's defense. They were more talented, certainly, than Iowa's defense. And they didn't allow the same big plays that Michigan's defense did. I mean, that unit in 2023 would not allow anyone to hit a big play on them. It was impossible. They only allowed 4.1 opponent yards per play, third. 3.5 opponent yards per carry, 19th. 5 opponent yards per pass attempt, first. That's insanity. 9.7 opponent yards per completion, again, insane. That was second. Their sack percentage and tackles for loss per game were much lower, but that was in part because this team rarely ever blitzed. They kept everything in front of them. 6.91% sack percentage, 49th, and only 5.54 tackles for loss per game, which was 73rd. And in the beginning of 2024, Knowles had kind of the same game plan that he did in 2023 for much of 2024. But adjustments had to be made because the corners weren't as good as they were in 2023. The corners were not as disciplined in coverage. They were much grabbier, but the D-line was more experienced. Safety was upgraded, and therefore as the year went on, and especially after the Oregon game, he made adjustments. In his third year with Ohio State, the Buckeyes only allowed under Knowles 12.9 points per game, first. 0.202 points per play, first. 254.9 yards per game, first. 4 yards per play, first. 2.7 opponent yards per carry and under 90 rushing yards per game, second. And only 6 yards per attempt, 10th, and 10 yards per completion, third. They were first in defensive sack percentage, getting a sack on about 10.71% of their opponent's dropbacks, which is just insane, especially as the year progressed. When in the playoffs, Ohio State didn't blitz all that much in terms of sending, 6 or 7 guys. They typically only sent sometimes 3, 4, 5, and they'd still get home because of the amazing pass rushers they had. And also Cody Simon, who I think Knowles had a heavy hand in, along with James Laurinaitis. And Ohio State only got 7.06 tackles for loss per game. I say only as if that's small. That's quite a bit. And they bullied offensive lines in the playoff. They bullied Penn State's elite offensive line in the regular season. Jim Knowles is the real deal. That's all I'm trying to say. This was an absolute bombshell of a hire. Anyone who tells you this does not hurt Ohio State is lying, because even if they make an elite hire or a near elite hire or even just a great one, well, obviously if they make just a great one, no matter what Ohio State does, they will have a downgraded defensive coordinator next year. No matter what, like just straight up. And Penn State, they have the nation's best DC. I mean, the guy at Oklahoma State, every year the defense basically got better. And in year 4, it was really, really good. In the COVID year, where no one could tackle to save their life, they actually had, a good defense. Sometimes susceptible to big plays, but good defense overall. The 2022 defense, that defense surrendered a lot of big plays. But the 2023 defense, that unit, you could not do. The only way you were going to beat them is you had to move methodically down the field perfectly and be good at running up the middle. You did those things, you could move the 2023 defense. But if you can do those things at a high level, you can basically move any defense just a little bit and just a little bit. And then this season, it's kind of the same thing, except they allowed a little bit more big plays through the passing attack, and I blame that mainly on the corners. I think Burke has been up and down throughout his whole career. Amazing in 21 and 23, pretty bad in 2022, good this year, but not as good as he was in 2023, for example. And Igbinosun has a lot of work to do, let's say. So, honestly, this is the best hire that Penn State could have made on the defensive side of the ball. I think, of course, that Penn State needs to upgrade at wide receiver, and I think they need to be better at quarterback. I think Drew Aller needs to be more accurate. He needs to be more poised. It'd be helpful to Penn State if he was more mobile. But this was huge. This helps Penn State's chances to finally beat Ohio State or win the Big Ten or win the national championship. I mean, my reaction of this in sum is that he's the nation's best defensive coordinator, and because Penn State's not broken defensively in the way that Ohio State was when he got there, or in the way that any school with Oklahoma State's talent is, they'll improve. I don't think they're going to have a down year on defense. Of course, will it be as good as this past Ohio State defense or the defense before that? I don't know, and I'd probably lean toward no, because those units were loaded, particularly the 2024 one, when you have like an alien in Caleb Downs and a super senior in Jack Sawyer, who's just a phenomenal player, and same with like that entire D-line, much of the linebackers, sections of the secondary too. But I do think most positions for Penn State are going to improve performance-wise. I think that with Zane Durant back at defensive tackle and the depth they have there, you're going to see improvement. I think at linebacker, with Kobe King leaving, that hurts. But Knowles has been involved with linebackers at Ohio State before in his previous stops. He's done very well coaching that position. I would expect Tony Rose to take a huge step forward, and same with anyone in that group. I think A.J. Harris is going to be a superstar next year. I think that whether it's a Davian Collins or Elliott Washington, they're going to benefit from his scheme. And Knowles, another thing about him is it's linebackers and safeties. That's his specialty. And Zakee Wheatley coming back is huge. Zion Tracy returning at the line position is big. I think that, of course, with Abdul Carter leaving, D-end is going to regress a little bit, at least right D-end, where Abdul Carter lined up typically. But overall, it's an A-plus hire. I mean, 100 out of 100 on the report card, plus some extra credit for James Franklin and Pat Kraft. This was an elite hire, and Ohio State now must act fast because they're super late in the cycle. I mean, they can get someone, maybe an assistant from the NFL, not a D coordinator probably, although they have the money to where maybe they could pull that off. But whether it's an assistant coach from the NFL or they promote internally, or maybe they send a bunch of money to a college DC, they got to act fast, and no matter what, they're regressing, and Penn State caused that. And Penn State is the benefit of it directly because they hired Jim Knowles. So I don't know what else to tell you other than the fact that this is a big deal. This is news. I mean, this is something that, again, a week ago, would any of you have thought that Jim Knowles would leave a national champion for Penn State who can't win big games? I don't think so. I do not think so. Ultimately, I think Ohio State's still going to be a really, really good team in 2025, a near elite team, and I think the same of Penn State. So it's going to be interesting to see how this changes, if it changes at all, the balance of power in the Big Ten. But for Penn State, this is as close to they can get to a natty or bust season. And with that, wow, I mean, I just love talking about college football, and news like this is huge. It's absolutely huge. So that was really the breaking news of the day, guys. Thank you, Chris Lane, by the way, for the $2 super chat. I appreciate it very much. He said to the effect, Sam, Penn State's defense couldn't have been much better. And I disagree with that. You guys know that I disagree with that based off of how the Orange Bowl went, based off of, I think, how even the Ohio State game in the regular season went, that I have some disagreements there. I think that Penn State at times this season, here's a big one. Penn State's fundamentals in secondary and linebacker tackling were not good. That was the biggest difference between their defense, which was near elite or great, and Ohio State's, which was clearly elite in NFL caliber. Ohio State never missed a tackle. That's why the Notre Dame game and the Natty was so weird, because that one touchdown, the first Jaden Greathouse touchdown, was the product of basically 2 or 3 missed tackles. That's what made it weird, because Ohio State doesn't miss tackles. That's why the Michigan game was weird, because the missed tackle on Khalil Mullings was like an anomaly. Jim Knowles' defenses at Ohio State outside of 2022, when again I think that they were rebuilding there, and I don't think Penn State has to do that, their tackling's been stellar. It's been incredible. I do agree, though, with the sentiment that Penn State needs to ensure they have good wide receivers, because otherwise, without Tyler Warren, who's Penn State going to be passing the ball to? Nicholas Singleton every other play? So, look, there are absolutely valid concerns about Penn State. I personally think that this helps Penn State a lot. Of course, I don't think that at the end of the day, Penn State's going to have... I mean, they could have the number 1 defense next year, but I wouldn't go that far, because Knowles is perfectly content taking his time, making sure that they're building. He is more of a builder than kind of an instant reactive type. And there are schools like Texas who returns a lot of their defensive backfield, and they were really, really good, and they recruit at a high level. Ohio State recruits at a high level. They don't return all that much outside of really, I would say, Caleb Downs, and then Sonny Styles and Igbinosun were some weaker links on the defense, but they should still be good. And then Michigan recruits at a high level and returns a lot in their defensive backfield. And there are other schools that return a lot. And there's schools like Georgia who recruit at a high level, or Clemson who returns a lot on defense and upgraded their defensive coordinator. But the point remains that this was big because it helped Penn State. And as for the Ohio State Buckeyes, they're kind of in a similar position with defensive coordinator potentially that Michigan was last year after they won it all, where they're kind of stuck because it's so late in the cycle. And part of that's not even their fault, because they won it all. That's, if anything, a sad consequence of success that shouldn't happen. But I need to get on to other things, so we're going to do that. And first and foremost, I want to talk about my awards for this season, my All-American awards, to be precise. So something that I thought would be a good idea to do to celebrate the 2024 season, the 12-team playoff, which was new, and how those games went about. The fact that this season, I think in a lot of ways, was very competitive, produced a lot of fun games, a lot of chaotic games, like Georgia-Alabama, or Ohio State-Oregon in the regular season, or I would also say Penn State-USC in the regular season, or Texas-Georgia both times, and Oregon-Penn State regular season, Texas-Ohio State in what was an electric and legendary Cotton Bowl. There was so much good about this season, and I had a lot of growth this year. So what I want to do to celebrate some of that is for me to give you all my player awards, All-American awards, offensive and defensive MVP, and also who I would have voted for to win the Heisman. So let's get to that. But before we do, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video as it progresses down below. Make sure to watch it all the way through. By hitting the notification bell, you'll get notified when we go live Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You will not want to miss that. And also, I think that, well, it's worth it, just to say that. And if you want to support the channel, check out the merchandise store Patreon page via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. And also the Discord server link is in those same locations, the pinned comment in the description. We talk college football 24/7, and I would love it if you joined the Discord server. So, All-American first team offense. Let's begin that. Quarterback, I have Cam Ward of Miami and Will Howard of Ohio State. Those are my two first-team All-American quarterbacks. And you might think it's weird to have two quarterbacks on the All-American team. My thought process behind this is that, you know, the best teams, the GOAT teams, they always have awesome players in their two-deep. And there's just so many good players that I don't like how we can only honor one with like that unanimous All-American tag. That's just a personal preference of mine. I understand if you find this to be confusing. But Cam Ward and Will Howard are my first team All-American quarterbacks. You look at running back, I think Boise State's Ashton Jeanty, clearly the best. And then Cam Scatabo and Caleb Johnson are the other first team All-American running backs. The theme here, again, is whatever number of each position group a team typically has on offense or defense, and then +1 for like a really, really good backup who's rotating in. Because again, that's how the greatest teams of all time typically operate. And then at center, I have Jared Wilson of Georgia. Thought he had a pretty good year. And then even though Seth McLaughlin got injured and wasn't able to play for Ohio State during their championship run or in the Indiana or Michigan games, so in the final 6 games of their season, he played at such a high level before his injury and played in enough games with a high enough sample size that I think he should be honored as a first-team All-American center. Was a really, really good center this year. At guard, I have Western Michigan's Addison West, who was just awesome this year in the MAC, should be a good NFL offensive lineman, was named as an All-American by many other sources. Dylan Fairchild for Georgia, another All-American in my mind. And then also we have Clay Webb at guard, who was a former Georgia offensive lineman, transferred to Jacksonville State, and has had 2 amazing seasons in a row. For tackle, I have Kelvin Banks Jr. as an All-American on the first team, Wyatt Millam, and Armand Membo. And for context, I do have a second team, I do have a third team, and a fourth team. We won't be doing those this season because this is kind of a new thing that I just want to lean in. But in 2025 and beyond, I will show you the first, second, third, and fourth team All-Americans, and I'll try and do stuff, if I have the time, for all conference teams as well, at least for the Power 4 teams. At wide receiver, we have Jeremiah Smith, true freshman. I thought was the best wide receiver in the country this year. He's on the All-American team. Jaden Higgins is from Iowa State, who was the Big 12's best wide receiver and a phenomenal player. Emeka Ibuka is the second Ohio State player for the wide receivers to be an All-American. And then I have Illinois' Pat Bryant, who almost had 1,000 yards, came up just short, but just did a very good job all season of being consistent and is a future NFL wide receiver. At tight end, this shouldn't surprise anyone, but we have Tyler Warren and also Harold Fannin Jr. at said positions for the first team All-American offense. So again, just to run it down, Cam Ward and Will Howard at quarterback, Ashton Jeanty, Cam Scatabo, and Caleb Johnson at running back, Jared Wilson and Seth McLaughlin at center, Addison West, Clay Webb, and Dylan Fairchild at guard, Kelvin Banks Jr., Wyatt Millam, and Armand Membo, at tackle, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Ibuka, Jaden Higgins and Pat Bryant at wide receiver, and Tyler Warren and Harold Fannin Jr. at tight end. Something to take note of is that Ohio State has four players who were just on the first team. And if I were to show you my second, third, and fourth team, you would see the following players from Ohio State: Travion Henderson, you would see Quinshon Judkins, and you'd also see Donovan Jackson at tackle. So this offense for Ohio State was loaded, unlike any other offense. Some other teams to take note of on the first team, or just on my All-American team's offense, would be Miami. They had Xavier Restrepo on another team, a bit lower. And I also want to take note of the fact that Jalen Noel, another Iowa State wide receiver, I think was on the second team, maybe the third team. Penn State had an offensive lineman on the All-American team, and Iowa had an offensive lineman at center, guard, and tackle on either the second or third or fourth All-American team. But Ohio State easily took the cake on offense, and that's a perfect segue into who my offensive MVP for the year was, that being Jeremiah Smith. Jeremiah Smith had 76 receptions for 1,315 receiving yards, averaged 17.3 yards per completion, made several highlight reels, whether they were one-handed catches, whether he just sent the Oregon defensive back in the Rose Bowl to the parking lot when he just kind of broke his ankles close to the end zone, and just all that he has done, his speed, his football IQ, his selfishness, his possession, his release. He's the perfect wide receiver. 15 receiving touchdowns, also had a touchdown on the ground with 47 rushing yards. Ohio State was 14-2 with Smith and national champions, and he had 381 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns in the college football playoff alone. So, yes, I think he is deserving of the offensive most valuable player award this season. You could argue for Ashton Jeanty. You could even argue for Caleb Johnson. Maybe you want to argue for Cam Ward because Miami's defense was just awful, and I get that. But I also think that this Ohio State team, even for how elite it was, I think without Jeremiah Smith, you take him out and you don't replace him with anyone, there's a very good chance in my mind that this team does not win the national championship. In fact, there's a universe where they don't even reach the college football playoff without him. He was very, very valuable to this team in ways that I think many process, but also I do think that some miss due to the fact that, Will Howard was a really good QB, the running backs were elite, generational even, and Emeka Egbuka is also a future NFL wide receiver. And the offensive line was respectable in the playoffs, and it was good before the injuries in the regular season. And the defense, of course, was generational. But Jeremiah Smith, I think, was the most valuable player on offense in the country this season. And he's a true freshman. He's only going to get better from here. Now let's check out the defense. At defensive tackle for my All-American first team, I have Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, and Walter Nolan. Michigan's interior D-line was the best in the country. I will tell you, though, that Ole Miss was very close there with Walter Nolan and the players they had on the interior. I think that, like Georgia, Texas actually had 2 of their defensive tackles on the second team All-American defense. And Ohio State's Tyleik Williams was also featured on some teams below the first team. At defensive end, Abdul Carter, I think, easily the best defensive end in the country. Follow him up, though. He's from Penn State with Ohio State's Jack Sawyer, Michigan's Josiah Stewart, and Ole Miss's Princely Unman-Malin. These teams, all 4 of those teams represented on the D-line so far: Michigan, Ohio State, Ole Miss, Penn State. I think along with Texas, who had Colin Simmons on this team, not the first team though, but a team or 2 lower, those 5 schools had like the best defensive fronts in the nation, and I don't think it was particularly close. I think Georgia was up there, but in a tier lower. They didn't really have any X factor. Well, no, they had some X factor players. They didn't have really any alien players the way that those 5 defensive lines did it. Linebacker, speaking of an alien player, we have Anthony Hill Jr., who I think was the best linebacker in the country this season. From Texas, Jay Higgins of Iowa, Cody Simon at linebacker, who was phenomenal this year, and Penn State's Kobe King. At safety, We have Caleb Downs from Ohio State, who I think is one of the most alien-like players in the country. He changed Ohio State's defense. He allowed Jim Knowles to make some adjustments that I don't know if he could have made with previous defenses. That's how good of a player Caleb Downs is. Xavier Watts of Notre Dame is also an All-American first-team safety. Lathan Ransom from Ohio State is too, and Andrew Makuba of Texas is up here. And I will tell you, if the safety room somehow had 5 safeties for this All-American defense, which at that point that would be ridiculous, Texas would also have 2 members, with Michael Taff being the safety just left off the board of the first-team defense. At corner, we have Jahdae Barron of Texas. We have Jermari Harris of Iowa. Leonard Moore, who I believe is a true freshman or redshirt freshman. Maybe I'm getting them mixed up at corner for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And also Ole Miss's Trey Amos. Contrasting this with the offense bears interesting results because the same teams keep showing up here, and that was not exactly the case with the offense. Texas has 3 members here. Iowa has 2. Penn State has 2. Notre Dame has 2. Ole Miss has 3. Ohio State has 4. And Michigan has 3. No team on this All-American first-team defense that's represented has less than 2 players up here. And these defenses all finished the year, all of them except for maybe Iowa finished the year practically top 10. And I think that Iowa's issues on defense had to do with some injuries they had in the regular season and also the fact that early on they had a lot of issues with their secondary. But a lot of players who will be future, I think, all-pros in the NFL, like the entire defensive tackle room, much of the linebacker room, much of the corner, safety, and D-end room. I mean, these players here were loaded, and many of them were on loaded defenses. My defensive MVP for the season was Abdul Carter of Penn State. He had 68 total tackles, 43 solo tackles, 24 tackles for loss, 12 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 4 passes defended, and Penn State was 13-3 with Carter. The defense totally changed when he wasn't in the game. The Boise State game showed that, and I think the Orange Bowl against Notre Dame, where he basically was playing with one arm, showed that. Carter was the only player, I think, on the season to register multiple sacks on Donovan Jackson. The only one. And Jackson has turned out to be a freak athlete and an alien himself, moving from guard to offensive tackle with the Buckeyes. Carter could be the potential first-round pick in the upcoming 2025 NFL Draft, so that is something to monitor, of course. And then finally, who I would have voted for to win the Heisman Trophy, best overall player in the country, would be Ashton Jeanty. 374 carries, 2,601 rushing yards, 7 yards per carry, 29 rushing touchdowns, 138 receiving yards, a receiving touchdown, and he earned over 100 rushing yards in all the games he played at Boise State, had a touchdown in 12 out of 14 of them, and Boise State was 12-2 with Jeanty. They nearly beat Oregon. They made the Penn State game much more interesting than I think Penn State wanted it to be or even expected it to be. And he's just a phenomenal player. He's a tackle buster. And I think that he's tough. He has a lot of heart. And he's very selfless. I mean, he kind of carried Boise State on his back for much of the season. Really, really elite player. And it's a shame, I think, that he didn't win the Heisman Trophy. I mean, look, I think Travis Hunter had a phenomenal year. I think Travis Hunter was a near elite wide receiver and a near elite corner. But I think we saw against Nebraska and against BYU and against some other schools that, you know, Travis Hunter's an alien, but he's, I mean, maybe I'm wrong on this. I don't think he's the best overall player in the country. Like, I think Jeremiah Smith would actually have done like more for Colorado than Travis Hunter did. I think that Ashton Jeanty would have done more for Boise State than, let's say, Travis Hunter. That's no disrespect to Travis Hunter. He's going to be picked top 10 in the draft. He should be. He is an alien. But I think that Ashton Jeanty deserved the award. I think he was the best overall player this season. And if he wasn't, I think that you're potentially looking at some other players besides Travis Hunter just again, in my opinion. But I would have voted for Boise State's Ashton Jeanty if I could have to win the Heisman Trophy. And that's that right there for my All-American and player awards. I just have to, man, people are firing off in the chat. I love that we are this engaged here on college football with Sam. I absolutely love it. And yeah, it's just absolutely incredible. I am going to just send a quick text here. Won't take too long. And we're good. Yeah, we'll get back. We'll get back right to it and talk about, of course, some other topics. First and foremost, we will be talking about Coach of the Year. That's what we'll be talking about up next. And I'll explain what this is here. You see all the long award names, but I'll explain that here just right now. So I want to get into who I think were some of the best coaches in the country for 2024. Best offensive coordinator, best defensive coordinator, best head coach, and just talk about that. And before we dive in, I want to ask you two things. One, let me explain the names for some of these awards because they're my own awards. And number two, if you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, comment your thoughts down below. Make sure to hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when I drop new content, potentially any time of the week, and also when we go live on Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to support the channel, donate to the channel, whatever you call it, the Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description. You can also send me a super thanks and join our Discord server via the link in the description or pinned comment. But to explain the names of these awards, we'll go with the flow. First and foremost, I want to talk about who I thought the best offensive coordinator in the country was, and it's actually coordinators plural. I gave the award to two winners, co-winners, because I think it was very close. We have the Day, Sarkisian, and Riley Award. Ryan Day, Steve Sarkisian, and Lincoln Riley have been some of the best minds offensively in all of college football. They have. I think that Ryan Day at Ohio State has fielded multiple elite offenses with his time there, whether as a coordinator or as a head coach. I think that Steve Sarkisian at Alabama and other play calling stops did very well with offenses. At Texas, it hasn't exactly been the same, but he's showcased elite offensive game plans like against Alabama last year, Michigan this year, at other points during his time with Texas. And then Lincoln Riley, we all know with his time at Oklahoma, and I think his first 2 years with USC, what he can do and how he's known as a quarterback guru. So that's the explanation for the naming of the award. Now I want to talk a little bit about why I think Kotelnicki deserved this award. First and foremost, Penn State last year was busted offensively. Sure, they were actually pretty good in terms of scoring offense, but that's because their defense forced a lot of turnovers, their special teams were good, and in big games, it was very, very obvious that the offense lacked in talent and also the play calling was a bit suspect. Kotelnicki takes over, and Penn State scoring 33.1 points per game, which is 22nd. They averaged 0.494 points per play, which is 14th. They gained 430.2 yards per game, which is 23rd. They are 10th. They finished top 10 in yards per play, averaging 6.4 yards per play. They were 18th in yards per carry, averaging 5.3. 18th also in yards per pass attempt, averaging 8.3. And they were 46th in yards per completion, averaging 12.5. And they averaged 4.1 offensive touchdowns per game, and their red zone scoring percentage was an 89.39%, which was just outside of the top 25. It's safe to say that this offense was clearly going to have some rebuilding issues, I think. And Penn State played, they played Ohio State's defense. They played Notre Dame's defense, which both of those were top 3, top 4 units this year. Ohio State number 1. I think Notre Dame definitely inside the top 4. And those are the defenses that they struggled against. But remember, they hung 24 points on Notre Dame's defense and could have hung more if just like one or two plays went a different way. And I think that for it being a year with, the wide receiver room not really improving all that much, and the offensive line slowly figuring itself out and getting really good at the end of the year, and of course, you got to remember Drew Aller. He's good, but he's also, in year 3 with the program and needs to do better, but also doesn't have the perfect wide receiver help. And Tyler Warren was not known as an alien level player before Kotelnicki came to Penn State. He kind of uncovered that hidden treasure within the Nittany Lion program. So I think he is deserving of this award. I also think, though, that Notre Dame's Mike Denbrock, offensive coordinator, deserves the award too. In his first year with Notre Dame, Denbrock averaged 36.1 points per game, which was 5th, 0.558 points per play, 4th, 399.1 yards per game, which was 47th, 6.2 yards per play, 21st, 5.7 yards per carry, 4th, 7.1 yards per pass attempt, 74th, 10.7 yards per completion, which was 112th. Mind you, that had more to do not with his play calling, but with Riley Leonard's limitations as a passer and Notre Dame's limitations at wide receiver and tight end. And they averaged 4.3 offensive touchdowns per game, which was 11th. They were 76th in red zone scoring percentage, only converting scores on 82.14% of their red zone trips. That was an area Notre Dame struggled in. But for all the limitations that Notre Dame has had every year under Marcus Freeman on offense, the limitations they've had historically under Brian Kelly on the offensive side of the ball, I thought that Denbrock did a phenomenal job. And averaging nearly 6 yards per carry is pretty impressive. And Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price were awesome this year. Riley Leonard did very well on the ground and also toward the end of the year improved as a passer. And the offensive line suffered injury after injury after injury and was nonetheless a great unit. So I do think Denbrock was also deserving of this award, the Day Sarkisian Riley Award for the best offensive coordinator in college football. So Mike Denbrock and Andy Kotelnicki are co-winners of such award. For the defensive award, we have the Minter Parker Knowles Diaz Award. Yes, I know that's a mouthful, but let me explain. In 2023, there were five top 5 defenses. 4 of them came from the Big Ten. 4. Iowa, Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan. And it was kind of in that order, if I got to be honest. I mean, maybe you switch Penn State and Iowa, but I know that Penn State's defense was more talented than Iowa's, but that was kind of how it went. But all of them were elite defenses last year, especially, I would say, Ohio State's and Michigan's. But I got to give Penn State props too. I mean, they led the nation in sack percentage that year, and Iowa led the nation in opponent yards allowed per play, and they had injuries all season long, and they dealt with the most inept offense perhaps in college football history and won their team a bunch of games. Jim Knowles wins the Minter Parker Knowles Diaz Award, and yes, in part it's named after him, in honor of that phenomenal 2023 season for not just Big Ten defenses, but college football defenses as a whole. Alabama that year had a defense that at the end of the year was definitely a top 10 unit. Clemson that year registered top 5 in defensive efficiency with now fired defensive coordinator Wes Goodwin. I mean, that was a good year 2023 was for defense in a lot of ways. Knowles' defense this year only allowed 12.9 points per game, first. 0.202 points per play, first. 254.9 yards per game, again, first. They were also first in opponent yards per play, only allowing 4. Only allowed 2.7 yards per carry, which is second. Only allowed 6 yards per pass attempt, 10th. Third in opponent yards per completion, allowing 10. And their sack percentage, which is how often they earned a sack in terms of their opponent's dropbacks, 10.71% first, and they gained around, or not gained, but forced around 7 tackles for loss per game. Pardon me. Knowles is the best defensive coordinator in the country. I think that this defense was the best defensive coaching job in the country this year. So he's the unanimous winner. There is no co-winner here, like with my offensive coaching award, the Day Sarkisian Riley award. I'm gonna have to get used to saying that, but yes. And I also believe that if there were to be a second, third place award, like a gold medal and bronze for this type of award, which I won't do, but hypothetically, if there was, I think Pete Kwiatkowski and Bryant Haynes of Texas and Indiana, respectively, and also Al Golden of Notre Dame. I think those coordinators would have been semifinalists, along with Jim Knowles, for this award. Finally, we have the Nick Saban Coach of the Year award. Nick Saban was, the best head coach in the history of college football. And I think that a former Saban assistant in Curt Cignetti, I think along with another head coach, this is another one where there are co-winners, did the best job. In his first year with Indiana, the Hoosiers, they were second in scoring offense, second in points per play, averaging 38.2 points per game and 0.572 points per play. They were not top 25 in yards per game or even yards per play, but they were just very methodical, very efficient. They did a good job of being fundamentally sound. I think they were the most fundamentally sound team overall in college football. They were top 10 in almost all defensive categories. Points per game, where they only allowed 16.7. Points per play, where they only allowed 0.265. Points per or yards per game, where they only allowed 267.6. They only allowed 4.2 opponent yards per play. And their final FPI rating for the season was a 19.4. So they were 19.4 points better than the average college football team per FPI, which was 10th. I think that Curt Cignetti did the best, or at least one of the best, coaching jobs in college football for 2024. I also think that Marcus Freeman can be put in the same category. In his third year with Notre Dame, the Irish finished third in FPI, viewed 25.2 points better than the average college football team per Football Power Index. They were top 5 in scoring offense and scoring defense, scoring 36.1 points per game, but only allowing 15.3. So they had an average margin of victory of 20.8 points. That's factoring in their games against Indiana, their game against Georgia, against Penn State, and also their loss to Ohio State. So I think Freeman did a very good job, especially with hindsight being 2020, but the NIU loss. If you would have told me that after losing to NIU that Notre Dame would have made it to the national championship game for a chance to be the best team in the country, I would have laughed at you. I think everyone would have laughed at you. But you would have been correct. That's exactly what happened. Marcus Freeman rallied the troops, and what is, I think, one of the best and potentially the best staff of the 2024 season, Marcus Freeman, Al Golden, Mike Denbrock, they went on an amazing run, and I think Notre Dame has broken through the glass ceiling that Brian Kelly couldn't, and that obviously Charlie Weiss couldn't break through. And that's a credit to Marcus Freeman right there. So him and Curt Cignetti are co-winners of the Nick Saban Coach of the Year award. In the future, I'm hoping and yet also expecting that there won't be as many co-winners. Granted, there will also be more awards, as you know, this is just the first year of me doing this, so do expect those things. But in sum, I think that some of the best coaching jobs of the nation were done by Indiana and Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman, Curt Cignetti, and their staff. And I think that Andy Kotelnicki and Mike Denbrock and Jim Knowles did the best job of any offensive minds throughout this whole season. And some runner-ups there, I think, on the offensive side, you'd have to go with Will Stein of Oregon. I also think Chip Kelly did a very good job with Ohio State. And then defensively, I'd go with Indiana's Bryant Haynes and Texas's Pete Kwiatkowski as runner-ups as well. So there you have it for the coaching awards. Just taking a brief stretch right here. And now we're going to move on to some college football playoff and also top 25 predictions. And then, of course, these videos will be released throughout the next few days. Hopefully, some tonight, some tomorrow, Tuesday. I'll definitely be going live tomorrow and Wednesday. We'll come up with certain things to talk about at, again, 6 p.m. Eastern time. So make sure to hit the notification bell, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live at 6 p.m. again on Mondays and Wednesdays weekly. And if I have the time, only if I have the time, because school and finishing out college is very important to me, then you will be able to see other content I release that isn't tied to those live streams, or maybe like today, I will go live an additional time per week. But now let's move on. I want to discuss very quickly, we're only going to talk about each team for well under a minute here, but I want to talk about my way too early top 25 and also kind of give you a top 30, give you some teams that just missed my top 25. So we are going to do a never too early top 25. It's time to look into the crystal ball and talk. Oh, that's actually the wrong prompt. See, I'm typing things out. Little bit of a look ahead spot right there. But college football fans, it's never too early to rank the best teams in the country because there's only the preseason. There's never the offseason. The word offseason does not even exist, and I follow Josh Pate in that regard. So let's dive into my top 25 teams for the 2025 season. From the most recent success stories like Ohio State, Texas, Notre Dame, and Penn State, to potentially returning powerhouses like Alabama and Michigan that had some down years, to a dark horse candidate for playoff success or maybe just winning 9 or 10 or 8 games like Louisville, Nebraska, South Carolina, although maybe they're not a dark horse anymore because they have a whole lot of talent and kind of popped off in 2024. We're breaking down who's set to compete for a national championship, for a conference championship, for finishing inside the top 25, for maybe earning a big win, or maybe surprising us all and exceeding our expectations. So sit back, relax, grab a snack, popcorn, or just relax and listen and watch the whole thing through because we're going to be covering contenders, pretenders, and surprise risers for 2025 in this way too early top 25. Or perhaps I should say never too early top 25. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell if you haven't already. Comment your thoughts down below. If you want to support the channel, the links to the Patreon page and merchandise store are in the description or pinned comment. And I would highly advise you to join our Discord server via the link in the description or pinned comment where we talk college football 24/7. Also, finally, make sure to hit the bell because you'll get notified when we go live Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern time. But I want to kick this off, starting off with number 30, Boise State. Boise State's coming off of a college football playoff appearance, and I think they can make another one as the auto bid for the highest-ranked Group of 5 conference champion. That's because, yes, they lose Ashton Jeanty, but they return Matt O'Madsen, much of their offense, and in particular, 4 starters on the offensive line, and they do bring a hefty amount in their defensive backfield, and I think their staff's rather underrated. Up next at number 29, we have the Michigan State Spartans. I love Jonathan Smith. I love their staff. I think it's one of the better staffs in all of college football, actually. I just think that they got handed a Mel Tucker caliber roster. I believe in Aiden Childs. I believe in Nick Marsh. I think they've done a good job through the portal, bringing in offensive players in particular, especially on the offensive line. And Joe Rossi, I think, does a good job on defense. He improved Michigan State's defense drastically last year. Who's to say it won't improve again in year 2 of his system? At number 28, we have SMU. The Mustangs do lose an incredible amount of players, especially on defense, but they do return Kevin Jennings. Before they joined the ACC, were one of the better Group of 5 teams at getting high-caliber recruits. We saw them almost get Keon Russell, who was committed to them for quite some time as a high-caliber quarterback that Alabama eventually picked off. But I do trust Rhett Lashley. I like the staff that he has. I think they're an underrated team in terms of talent. And Kevin Jennings, speaking of talent, is a talented quarterback that I think just had more of a bad day at Penn State than anything else and faced a really aggressive defense. He's a good QB with a high ceiling. At number 27, we have the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Nebraska is a team that I want to be higher on, but I do have some questions about them. Nonetheless, this is a huge step forward from where they have ever been. in really the past decade, if we're being honest. I think that defensively they lose a lot, and they'll regress, probably have the worst defense of the Matt Rule era, but they'll easily have the best offense because Dylan Raiola is in his second year. I think that a player like Ja'Cory Barini Jr. is going to have a phenomenal sophomore year after a great true freshman season, a breakout season. They've gotten players like Dane Key and Elijah Pritchett from the transfer portal, and they got the Sun Belt Player of the Year on defense, and they're just using the portal a lot. They're retaining some critical starters, and they're recruiting at a high level. And Rule in year 3 is a kingmaker, so watch out for Nebraska. At number 26, we have the Iowa Hawkeyes. Iowa loses a ton. 2024 was supposed to be their year when they were top 5 in returning production. Instead, they went 8-5 because the reality is you can't win all your close games every single season, and they still had some warts on the offensive side of the ball that held them back. But they do return Brendan Sullivan. They return, I believe, center Logan Jones. I think they return him. But they finally put together their offensive line this year, which was one of the best in the country. On defense, they bring back a player like Aaron Graves, for example. They have talent defensively. Phil Parker's a wonderful defensive coordinator. I don't know if they'll be one of the best teams in the country, but I still think they'll go bowling, and they could easily be a top 25 caliber team, especially because with all their wide receivers coming back, much of their tight ends, they have a running back room that's deep, and Tim Lester's in year 2 of his system. I think this will be the best Iowa offense since 2020 or 2019, better than any of the prior 4 offenses for sure. At 25th, we have Florida. Florida has DJ Lagway, a bunch of recruiting classes. They upgraded at DC by promoting Ron Roberts and kind of kicking Austin Armstrong to the curb. I think they'll be top 25. Do I think Billy Napier's a good coach? No. Do I think he is absolutely atrocious and terrible? Well, maybe, but I wouldn't go quite that far, and recruiting does matter. I think it's overrated on this channel, but that doesn't mean that I believe it doesn't matter. It does, and DJ Lagway is the reason why. If not for him, I would not have Florida anywhere near this list. But they have him. They bring back Eugene Wilson. They have some good offensive line players, and I think they'll be better on defense next year, in part based off returning production and other factors. So Florida's at 25th. Oklahoma's at 24th. This one I'm skeptical on, but again, this is a very early, way too early, or if you want to be a purist, never too early list. This will be subject to change in the next 2 weeks. In fact, in that time frame, there might be a new top 25 video out, depending on how much time I have and how classes are going. But anyway, Oklahoma brings in John Mateer. They return a lot on defense. They return a lot on the offensive line, too, and Deion Burks should be healthy. So I just think they'll be a little bit better than they were last season. At 23rd, we have the Minnesota Golden Gophers, who they bring back Darius Taylor. I think A.J. Turner is the name of the man they got from Marshall, name of the kid they got there at running back. He was phenomenal with the Thundering Herd. Their offensive line returns some production. They lose Daniel Jackson at wide receiver and defensive coordinator Corey Heatherman to Miami. But they also return a lot on defense, like Coy Parrish, safety, was a freshman All-American. He's going to be phenomenal for them. I just think that PJ Fleck is a good culture. They're well-conditioned. They're strong. This could potentially be that final breakout year for Minnesota, much like they had in 2019. At 22nd, I have the USC Trojans. USC's defense should be one of the better defenses in the Big Ten, based off of what they brought in through the portal, what they're returning as well. Like, they're returning Eric Gentry, for example. They got Keyshawn Silver in the portal, and they're bringing back Anthony Lucas, who is pretty incredible under DC DeAnton Lynn, and they've retained a lot of their assistant coaches there too. The issue with USC is how much they lost to the portal and also to the draft on offense, mostly to the portal, but also they lost Jonah Monheim, a pretty good center, to the draft. If USC's offense can be what it has been under Riley in 22 and 23, or what Riley's offenses were at Oklahoma, this can easily be a top 10 team, if not a top 5 team, based off of how I view the defense. But the offense has a lot of question marks. At number 21, I have BYU. BYU returns a lot of production as well. I think Jay Hill's a defensive mastermind. Kalani Sitake is a coach that I have liked for a long time. I sold my stock on him in 2024. I regret that, of course, because they went 11-2, had a very successful year, but they bring back a lot on a variety of positions, including quarterback Jake Retzlaff, who man, talk about an up and down quarterback, but then also talk about players like Parker Kingston, for example, who was just awesome as a returner. And it's a well-coached team with a good culture, and they return plenty of guys. So that's why they're in the top 25. Tennessee is 20th. We're finally breaking in to the top 20. The Tennessee Volunteers return Nico Imaliava. They got Sam Pendleton, an offensive lineman from Tennessee, in the portal. They return players, I think, like at running back behind Dylan Sampson, and on defense they do lose a ton. But mainly we're talking about Nico Imaliava. The fact they haven't used the portal a ton, but selectively to improve certain positions. Tennessee is a bit of an unknown for me, especially right now. You know, they lose James Pierce Jr. They lose Dylan Sampson, for example. I believe they bring back Miles Kitselman. Correct me if I'm wrong. Again, very early list. The depth charts are not all set, although really yesterday or 2 days ago at the time of this recording, they got set. But that's not enough time for me to pour through all of these, which, again, this list will be updated. But Tennessee is kind of in that area where I feel uncomfortable putting them anywhere. I'd feel uncomfortable leaving them out. I wouldn't even leave them out, but I'd feel uncomfortable putting them top 20, top 15, top 25. They could be anywhere from top 5 to like just outside the top 25, in my opinion. Very high ceiling, very high floor for the Tennessee Volunteers. At number 19, we have Louisville, and I will just keep it short and I will keep it simple because they lose a ton. They also bring in a ton through the portal. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is Miller Moss is a good QB. And reason number 3 is Jeff Brom times Miller Moss is a match made in heaven. That is a college football marriage. And for that reason alone, I think Louisville, along with what they've done in the trenches on both sides of the football, I think is going to be a pretty good team in 2025. At 18th, we have Ole Miss. Ole Miss loses Walter Nolan. They lose Jared Ivey, Princely Unman-Malin. They bring in his younger brother, though, from Nebraska, Princewell Unman-Malin. They lose Trey Amos. They lose much of their O-line, and they lose Jackson Dart. But I think Kiffin has done a good enough job developing and recruiting and using the portal to where I'm going to give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt through the portal. And I think the players he's recruited out of high school have been developed enough, especially on the offensive side of the ball, to where I think they're still going to be a good team next year. Will they be top 5 in power ratings or top 10, top 15 at the worst? I think they might be a little bit worse than that. But I think Ole Miss can make the college football playoff next year if they don't just lose to Kentucky or Florida type teams. Like they have to find a way to treat every game like it is a Super Bowl. If they do that, then Ole Miss, I think, can definitely make the playoffs in 2025. At 17th, we have LSU. LSU, if they didn't use the portal a ton, I would put them even lower than this because I don't like Brian Kelly, and I think they have some questions on their staff overall outside of Bo Davis, who I think is a legendary D-line coach. They lose Will Campbell. They lose players on their O-line. Garrett Nussmeier comes back, though, and I think that with the development they have at receiver, the recruiting that they have done on both sides of the football, the effort they've put in, I think that this is a team that could reach the playoffs. I don't think they're exactly capable of winning the SEC in my mind. The reason they're above like Ole Miss and Tennessee, for example, is because I think they have a higher floor with all the good transfers they brought in, like Josh Thompson, for example, and like Jack Pyburn from Florida. And there are others. Oh, Michael Van Buren, who I think is a great addition for the future at QB. But their ceiling, I question it a little bit. A&M's a team, though, whose ceiling I don't really question. Great portal class. They return Marcel Reed. As of now, they're bringing in Micah Hudson. And I think that Mike Elko's a genius. I think that defensively, there's going to be a lot more building to do off of what was a good unit, but not a great unit on the defensive side of the ball from 2024 to 2025. They were a team that was just a few steps away from finally breaking through that kind of 8-9 win glass ceiling that many joked about Jimbo Fisher establishing there. But it is year one. I really trust Mike Elko. I think you all should trust Mike Elko as well, and Colin Klein, who's a wonderful offensive coordinator. At 15th, we have the Illinois Fighting Illini. Illinois, I think, is a team to pay attention to because they return 18 starters from their roster in the Citrus Bowl, where they beat South Carolina. Luke Altmaier is back. Much of their offensive line is back. Gabe Jacas is back. Much of their secondary, linebacker core, everything. And their coordinators, Barry Looney Jr. and also Aaron Henry, are back. And they've been building through the portal, through recruiting, just slowly. They went 10-3 this year. There's a chance they could get 11 wins next year. Pay attention to Illinois. At 14th, we have the Arizona State Sun Devils. They return Sam Leavitt. Cam Scadaboo is gone, but they return Leavitt and a bunch of other starters. And I think Kenny Dillingham's building something special there. And Leavitt was, top 15, top 10 QB by QBR in 2025. And their schedule, once again, is pretty easy. So they can build momentum, and with the new playoff structure, they can make a mistake or perhaps two and reach the playoff. And I think that they are going to be better than they were last year, given all that they return. At number 13, we have the South Carolina Gamecocks. They return Dylan Stewart, who was, phenomenal at defensive end. They bring back Lenora Sellers, Nick Harbor. They have used the transfer portal pretty well. And I think that their talent profile continues to level up to a point where, look, they can beat Alabama next year. They can reach the playoffs. They maybe could win the SEC because Lenora Sellers, as the year progressed, really was that good. And they have, like Harbor and Stewart, nearly forgot his name. They're freak athletes. And they have freak athletes at other positions too that we probably don't know about yet. So this is a good team. It's why I have them at 13th. I just don't have them higher because they lose a good amount on their O-line and D-line, and I don't know how I view Shane Beamer as an X's and O's coach. Speaking of an X's and O's coach, we got Alabama at 12th with Kalen DeBoer. The only reason I don't have them higher is they lose Jalen Milroe, they lose Justice Haynes, they lose Elijah Pritchett, they lose not Caden Proctor, but Tyler Booker on the offensive line. They lose, for example, CJ Dupree at tight end. Defensively, they lost Jaheim Otis to the portal, who I think was a rotational player. They lose, I can't remember all the names, sadly, for Alabama, but they lose a lot. They lose a trusty linebacker, a set of linebackers, actually, and I just think that Kalen DeBoer is installing his system. He might need time for that, and I don't know what the QB situation is. I don't. I don't know if Ty Simpson is ready. I don't know if Austin Mack is ready. You could say the same with a lot of teams in front of Alabama, though. I think Alabama's anywhere from a top 15 to the best team in the country. I'm just a little bit low on them based off of how Michigan really bullied their starting O-line with their backup D-line. That's concerning because Michigan's backup D-line might be the best in the country for 2025. It's not generational like their 2024 unit is, and schools like Georgia, Texas, South Carolina, and a lot of Big Ten playoff caliber teams will have a level of D-line that Michigan will probably have this season and what they showed in the ReliaQuest Bowl. So that's concerning, I think, from an Alabama standpoint. At 11th, this is my first kind of shocker team. I have Georgia Tech. I just want to introduce you to the fact that Haynes King's a top 10 quarterback when healthy. Georgia Tech had a top 10 rushing offense. Tyler Santucci brought up the defense 20, 25 placements in year one. Imagine what he could do in year two. And they've been recruiting at a high level, developing at a high level, and Brent Key has a winning record against top 10 teams. So with that in mind, I think Georgia Tech's going to have a really good year. They could win the ACC. They could reach the college football playoff. And that's enough said. Just got to keep it short because I think Georgia Tech's going to be a very sweet team this year. At number 10, we have Michigan. This is mainly for the reason that where Michigan loses production, tight end and D-line, they're going to have a drop-off, but they have depth there. I'm talking about Rayshawn Benny stepping up at D-tackle. Derek Moore comes back. I think that the secondary and linebacker core got better as the year went on. And Bryce Underwood's also as close to you can get for a true freshman alien at QB. And combine that with a lot of returning production at quarterback and a running back room and wide receiver room that has questions, but should be, in terms of wide receiver, better than last year. Running back close to what Michigan had in 2024. I think Michigan's poised for a bounce-back season. Now, I will say, in comparison to a team like Alabama, I don't think Michigan has the same ceiling that Alabama does. Michigan's floor is probably lower than Alabama's as well. So again, there's a lot of changes that can be made. I don't think Michigan can win it all in 2025. I don't. That would genuinely shock me. In fact, any team on this list outside of Alabama and USC that we've talked about so far, I don't think can win it all. I think only those two teams, maybe South Carolina, and then after South Carolina in the third tier of can they win it all before we get to the top 8 teams, maybe Michigan, maybe A&M, maybe LSU or Ole Miss. I don't think many others can win it all. It's a lot more wide open, the national championship is, compared to years past, but still is a pretty exclusive club. Indiana is a team that I do like. They're a team that I like. And I believe that with Curt Cignetti, all things are possible. And they bring in Fernando Mendoza. They bring in Roman Hemby. And I believe that they're going to drop off a little bit. But at the end of the day, with Cignetti's coaching, with his coordinators, with his staff, and a workable schedule, I believe that they are going to be like a good team again. So pay attention to Indiana in the future with an elite staff, and I think one of the nation's better QBs, a good running back in Hemby. They return Elijah Surratt. They return Michael Kamara, D'Angelo Pons, Omar Cooper Jr. They return a lot of good players. At 8th, we have Clemson. Clemson returns, well, Garrett Riley as OC. They bring in Tom Allen, an upgraded defensive coordinator in my mind. They return Cade Klubnik at quarterback. And a lot of players at wide receiver, O-line, defense, like Peter Woods, for example, and Avion Terrell at corner. They're going to be a good team in 2025. I think they're going to take a massive step forward. This is really the first team inside the top 10 where I'm going to confidently say they can win it all. Number 7 is Oregon, another team I'm confident can win it all. Oregon loses a lot of players, Dylan Gabriel, Jordan James, much of their O-line, almost their entire starting defense. No, correction. They lose their entire starting D-line outside of Mateo Uriungale, their entire defensive front outside of Mateo Uriungale, and much of their defense. And with Tosh Lupoi, after that Rose Bowl, after the Big Ten Championship game, I think defense is a big question mark for Oregon. That's why I don't have them top 5. But they're recruiting at a better level each and every year. I think Dante Moore has wild upside. Dakarian Moore, true freshman wide receiver they have coming in, he's someone to pay attention to as someone who, I'm not going to say he'll beat Jeremiah Smith, because Jeremiah Smith's insane, but he could be as close to Jeremiah Smith as you can get within reason for Oregon next year. Evan Stewart comes back, and they return Kenyon Sadiq at tight end and Noah Whittington at running back, and they've recruited and developed well in the O-line. So I think offensively with Will Stein, they'll have no problem. The question for how high Oregon can shoot is what happens with their defense. Number 6 is Miami. Miami's actually ahead of Oregon because I believe in their defensive coordinator, Corey Heatherman, more than I do Oregon's Tosh Lupoi. And I also think that Shannon Dawson is pretty close to Will Stein. I make that comparison because Cristobal, of course, used to coach at Oregon. Both of those schools recruited a high level on the O-line and also the D-line. For Miami, Reuben Bain Jr. comes back. Carson Beck comes in at quarterback from the portal. I think that the Hurricanes are going to finally make the playoffs. I'm going to give a little bit of a spoiler here in 2025, and they could easily win the ACC. At 5th, we have the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia only brings back, I think, a total of 9 starters, but they've had so many injuries that I think they are going to have more experience than a team that would return only 9 starters, at least typically. They also have the consensus number 1 recruiting class for like the past 3 years, basically. So I think that talent-wise they'll be fine. Kirby Smart's a great coach. Glenn Schumann's a great DC. I believe that Gunnar Stockton, with further training, will do better. And remember, they brought in Zachariah Branch at wide receiver and a kid from Texas A&M, who I think is going to be pretty good. So, who was very good, correction, and I think at Georgia will be just as good. So, pay attention to Georgia. I think that Georgia is a team of very high ceiling, very high floor. They're, no matter what, I think going to be a top 10 team. The question is, can they win it all? Number 4 is Ohio State, and Ohio State would have been higher than this. Number 3, number 2, number 1, if not for the fact that they're losing the vast majority of their offense, defense, and also they're losing their best staffer, Jim Knowles. Ohio State, though, is still going to be a national championship contender with Ryan Day as their head coach, Julian Sayin at quarterback, who I think is going to have an awesome redshirt freshman season. Jeremiah Smith is back. Carnell Tate is back. The interior of the O-line is back. They're bringing Max Clare at tight end. And on defense, they're too deep. It is coached by Jim Knowles for 3 straight years, coached by Larry Johnson, James Laurinaitis, and Tim Walton and Matt Gurari for several years as well. So I think they're going to be just fine in terms of their ceiling. The question is, how low is their floor and how consistently can they hit their ceiling? Like, can they hit their ceiling the same way they did in 2024? I don't know, but we'll have to figure that out. At number 3, we have the Texas Longhorns. Texas, also like Ohio State, loses a ton, though they do bring back more in the defensive backfield. They've recruited a much higher level and developed at a better level than Ohio State has in the offensive line. They return Ryan Wingo at wide receiver, and they've recruited and developed at a high level there. They lose Gunnar Helm at tight end. They bring back C.J. Baxter, who was injured for the entirety of 2024, along with Contravion Wisner, who was healthy. So their running game should improve. And I think that Arch Manning with mobility should help them get to more of a 2023 level run game. And Manning in passing didn't have the experience of Ewers, but you certainly see that he has the same upside that Ewers does. So Texas is a team that I believe in under Sark, at least for being like a perennial or an annual contender. That game between Texas and Ohio State in week 1 is going to be very fascinating, guys. At number 2, I have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Notre Dame returns much of their defensive backfield outside of Xavier Watts and Jack Kaiser. They do lose the entirety of their D-line, though, so that's something to pay attention to. They bring back much of their starting offensive line. They return a lot of their starting wide receivers, and they bring in Malachi Fields from Virginia, who nearly had 1,000 yards. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price both come back. They have a deep QB room, and I think Riley Leonard might actually have an additional year of eligibility, though I'm uncertain about that. Plus, another year under Mike Denbrock isn't going to hurt. Another year under Marcus Freeman with his elite recruiting and development isn't going to hurt. I'm curious, much like Ohio State, to see who Notre Dame replaces at DC, but I still think that this year, only 1 year removed from elite defensive coaching, those defenses will be fine. Notre Dame is included in that. And for number 1, the Jim Knowles hire really solidified this. Penn State's my number 1. They're my national championship pick as well. The Nittany Lions are. I think that even with the questions that James Franklin has, and they're big, and I hate doing this. I hate picking James Franklin to win things. I liked it in 2024 because, they made the Kolnicki hire, Aller was in his second year, and they had alien players. But with another year of James Franklin not breaking through, it makes it very hard for me to pick him again. But I think it's the most logical choice. They return the most production. They bring back much of their defense and almost all of their offense and offensive line. They return as much as you can at tight end when Warren doesn't have any eligibility. They return 2 NFL running backs, a potential future first-round NFL QB. Kolnicki will be in his second year. And Jim Knowles, Knowles has commanded several elite defenses. I know that his defenses typically take time to implement. The point is Penn State's not broken defensively. They're only 2 years removed from Manny Diaz. Tom Allen was not perfect, but he also didn't do the worst job in the world, and Penn State's recruited and developed at a high level on the defensive side of the football. So I think that many of the teams on this list, no duh, will reach the playoffs, specifically the teams in the top 10 for the most part. And I think that at the end of the day, it's going to be your top 4 teams, Ohio State, Texas, Notre Dame, and Penn State. Unless they play each other, those are going to be your semifinalists, in my humble opinion, because that's how it functioned this past season. That's how it functioned really the years before that with rare exception, is the team that is just straight up better wins in college football. This is not college basketball. This isn't the NFL. This is college football. So I think that your most likely national champions are going to come from Penn State, Notre Dame, Texas, Ohio State, and Georgia's kind of like that team who's teetering on that top 4 that could win it all as well. But I'm siding with Penn State to win it all, and that's my top 25 plus 5 right there. The first one for the 2025 college football season. All right, guys, I'm going to finish off with this today. We went a little bit longer than I would have expected, though I very much enjoyed this, and it was under 2 hours, which is good. I have a meeting with a friend that I have to get to, so we're going to do that. My college football playoff predictions, while they weren't showcased tonight, I'll showcase them tomorrow on my live show tomorrow. So I'll see you guys very soon. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, comment your thoughts down below. I love you all very much. Thank you for a phenomenal 2024 year. We'll see you for the 2025 preseason and the regular